Good morning. This is Professor Sescalini, and we're going to talk about Chapter 11 today, which is about liabilities. In particular, it's about bonds payable. So this whole chapter is about understanding the concept of a bond, how it works for a corporation, and how to calculate the selling price of the bond, how to calculate the interest payments, and how to calculate when I redeem my bond. So a bond is nothing more than an interest-bearing note. It's a way for an organization to generate capital ahead of time to fund a major project. And I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. So whenever I sell a bond, I'm going to have to give you interest every year. I'm going to actually pay interest every year. And so anybody who owns or holds a bond by me is kind of part of it's a creditor of the corporation. So a bondholder is kind of like a stockholder. And so let me give you a quick background about bonds. What happens are bonds are typically done in $1,000 increments. And let's say I'm a corporate and I'd like to fund a major building or major project and I need capital or cash. I will sell you a bond for $1,000. Now the bond is usually long term. Let's say we're going to do 10 years. And I'm going to pay you 10% interest. So here's what happens. You give me your $1,000 today. I'm going to pay you 10% interest of $1,000 every year for 10 years. And then at the end of the 10 years, I'm going to call back my bond and I'm going to give you your $1,000 back. So what that actually means is that I have your money up front. I have to pay you a 10% interest. 10% of a $1,000 bond is $100. So that means that I'm actually going to send you $100 every year as interest. And then at the end of the 10 years, I'm going to give you back your $1,000. So that's the concept of a bond. And again, they're usually in face value in increments of $1,000, and interest is usually paid semi-annually. That means twice a year. So going back to the concept of I'm going to give you 10% interest per year, because interest, whenever it's stated, is always per annum or per annual. So that means if I'm going to give you $100 interest every year, I'm going to send you a check every 6 months for $50. Every time I send you a check, which would be twice a year because it's semi-annual, that's considered the period. So a 10-year bond paid semi-annually would basically, you would get 20 checks. You would get 2 checks a year for 10 years. So consider that the period. So there's 20 periods in there. I just want to talk about terms right now. We're not going to talk about the different types of bonds because you know that I don't actually test you on terminology, but take a second to look at the different types of bonds. But we're going to talk about what actually needs to happen on a bond. So here's what we need to understand. When we issue the bonds, the 3 things that are the major factor is what is the face amount of the bond? Basically, what is it worth at maturity date? What is the interest rate on the bond? That is the interest rate that I'm offering you at this given time. And the other one is called the market rate of interest. So this means is what is the interest rate for other bonds in the same marketplace. So this is how this breaks down. The face value of the bond or the principal value, that's what it's worth at the end. The rate that I'm going to pay is called contract rate. So I'm offering you 10%. That is my contract rate. That never changes. It always stays exactly the same. And then finally, we have market rate. Market rate is what other people are offering for the same type of bond. This is the only variable in the whole equation is market rate. And so what's going to happen is we're going to compare the market rate and the contract rate of interest to determine how I sell the bond. Now, the first thing I'm going to teach you, or actually the last thing I'll be teaching you, it's in the appendix of Chapter 11, is how to price the bond for sale. And I have a handout that I'll be putting up, and I will also cover, it's in the appendix of chapter 11. So the key is, what is the market rate, and compare it to the contract rate. That tells me, do I sell the bond for the same, more, or less than? So here's things you absolutely need to know. When market rate is greater than contract rate, then I sell at a discount. And let me explain that. Contract rate is what I'm offering you. Market rate is what other people will offer you. So what happens is that my $1,000 bond, I will actually sell it to you at less than $1,000 because that's considered a discount. Because you can get a better rate of return from other people by buying something with the market rate. If market rate equals contract rate, then I sell for the $1,000 or face value. And finally, if market rate is less than contract rate, then I'm going to sell it above 1,000 or more than 1,000. That's called a premium. So basically, I'm offering you 10%. That's my contract. And market might be 8%. Well, you'll buy from me because I'm going to offer you a bigger return on your money. I can actually get more money up front. So you just need to understand these are very important factors here. Face value or face amount, discount, market is greater than contract, premium when market is less. Extremely important to write down and take notes on this. Now, I want to talk about a little bit more terminology before we start pricing the bond. So in this here, when we talk about the price of a bond, we talk about it as a percentage of the face value. So for example, if I'm going to sell you a $1,000 bond and I'm selling it at 98, that means 98% of the face value. So we use percents as a way to determine or to talk about the value of a bond. 98 would be 98% of 1,000. So that means I'd sell it at $980. However, if I quote it at 109, that's considered at 1.9% or 1.09% is what I'm selling at. So be careful on this. Be careful if it's under 100, then that's less than 100%. If it's more than 100, this really equates to 109%. And this is how you write it in decimals. So this concludes an introduction to bond. In the next video, we're going to start talking about how to understand the concept of the bond and the selling price.